Hey guys, Nathan Masters here with Brick System Brothers. This is a really interesting piece. This was going to be a HUWTAP piece, but the more I got looking into it and trying to figure out how it works with the system, the more I decided it kind of needs its own video. So just for clarification, this teal here with a couple of the wacky angles, this weird curvature cutout going on, it's got some antennas that Parker is using to steer this very rudimentary craft. This is the piece I'm talking about. It's piece number 2342. Bricklink calls it a utensil control panel, which makes kind of some sense seeing how it's used here. This is actually the official use in some of the sets. So this video is going to feel like a HUWTAP, which is Hold Up, What's That Awesome Piece, part of a series that we do here, but it's going to go beyond that because this is just such a weird piece. So this control panel, I like to call it a console. It's been used as a robot body component. Here in a minute we're going to look at some stuff on Bricklink online and just get a better idea of the dispersion, the colors, the availability. But just for reference, released in 1986 for the first time, this mold here. And I have a couple different, I have this teal, I have an old light gray. It was like available in eight colors. Yeah, we'll check it out in a minute. But the important thing to look at here is, like, what is this piece actually trying to do? And in terms of being a control body that you can mount levers and handlebars to, it's actually pretty versatile, because once you mount these levers on here, these actually have full rotation, so you can get it almost 360 degrees around. If you bump it up, you can get it all the way around. And then the levers, they actually pivot themselves. And so by the time you have this 360 degree rotation and then 180 with the levers, you've got a pretty wide range of applications just with two little lever pieces. Now there is another slightly different use that we can attach this piece with. Let's just move it back a little bit, and then if we bring this guy in, we actually have to go the other way because of these two bumps here. Again, we're going to look at the weirdness. 1x1 stud can attach. Since it's at an angle, we have to use a pivot, but we actually get a pretty decent control stand in the other orientation for a standing minifig. So we could have Parker, let's see, yeah, Parker and the standing minifig both on the same side. We have one assembly that can be for standing, and the other assembly with the levers can be for a seated minifig. And so in terms of being just a place to mount some control features, it's pretty decent. But if we start looking at the other points of contact and places to, you know, integrate this with the system, you know, there's an open stud here, there's some studs on the side, there's a slope on the top, and we want to ask the question, how efficiently does this fit with our system of Lego bricks? And that's where things just start to fall apart. So let's start with the positives. The positives are, I've got a little sub-assembly to look at here. The positives are, there are three that I've found just within the last hour. And yeah, I've been working on this for an hour. This is kind of the result of my research, desktop research. But anyways, let's look at our subassembly here. There's three main system connections that we can make. Now, is that good or bad? Well, we have to look at the possible connection points. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So out of 5 connection points, there's 3 somewhat obvious system connections. That's maybe a little bit on the low side. So let's investigate that a little bit. The first thing to notice is going to be our half stud offset, because this is effectively some kind of brick shape on a jumper. And so our jumper piece is pretty common. These have been around forever. It's just a 1x2 plate size, and then that makes your stud now at an offset of a half brick, a half stud, whatever you want. And so we see that really similar feature on the base of this piece. And then if we notice that there's a hole in the back of this, we can start to ask the question, what is it going to take to get something to line up and fit in the anti-stud? And it's pretty simple. All we need is a full width brick with a stud. Now this doesn't work with a headlight brick because that stud's actually recessed. We need the full width version. We're going to insert that into the back like so, and now we have perfectly legal. We can put a jumper on the bottom of that, and that all lines up really nicely onto any surface that you like. Alright, so that's a decent system integration. And then just looking at this, we also notice that the start of our angle, our back slope, or our secondary slope here, actually lines up with the top of the piece we just put on. And so there's possibly a little bit of conscious design there. It's just something to note. Now we start looking at the other stud on the side and where that lines up with, if you put something, let's break this apart real quick. If we start putting this kind of brick in this direction, what is it going to take to get these to line up? And it turns out, just with system bricks, system plates, it doesn't work. And so this is kind of where the whole thing starts to break down. We want to stack this up a little bit. We can see, okay, well, brick is too high. Let's try 2 plates. So let's see if this is going to give us what we want. Well, now 2 plates is our next increment down, and it's too low. So that's kind of a problem when you start to look at things lining up in system. Well, if a brick is too high and 2 plates are too low, there's somewhere in between. Now we need to start getting a half plate vertical offset, and I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's not as simple as you generally want to see with this kind of system connection. And so building this into a vertical side piece breaks. Alright, first break. What are the other redeeming factors here? Well, the next thing you have to look at is how is this stud actually centered in terms of the base stud. And it looks like it's pretty much directly above the base stud. So if we start putting these back to back, come on, there you go. Now we have something, now we have another redeemable feature here. This gets back to our system. We want to look for a way to start building off the side of this. That's only going to work if this is multiples, integer multiples of a Lego unit. And in this case, it is correct. So we can build onto the side. And this actually works however many studs apart you want to put it. So if we go 3 studs apart, now these are also 3 studs apart. Perfectly legal, very nice. Alright, so yeah, we can space these out however we want, and that will be an integer multiple of Lego units. Alright, good. 2 ways that it fits into the system, although you need 2 for the second one, so that is maybe a bit of a deal breaker. And we're already at like 8 minutes, so I'm going to try to keep running through this. Alright, third quality that kind of brings us into the system starts to get a little bit wonky. We're going to use some hinge plates. And this is where we start getting back towards the use of this as a console, because once you start adding hinges and pivots in, the whole new range of positions becomes available. But this one in particular I felt was worth a mention. So when these are positioned 3 studs apart, we can actually go to our sloped top of the piece now. Put some clips on here, and the first thing I noticed when I was looking at this was, alright, the distance for the inside of these bar clips looks like it could line up if we had some bars a stud apart. And so I tried it, and it turns out it does require a little bit of coaxing, but it seems like we have another perfectly legal connection here when we use some brackets, clips, I guess is what you would want to call these, bar clips. So this is really the only integration I've found for our slope top, is if you use these bar clips, specifically when they're 3 studs apart, and you use these bar clips, that will give you an attachment point for bars that are 1 stud apart. And I say 1 stud because even though this is a 1x2, if you go from the center of this stud to the center of this stud, that's just 1. So again, we're looking at our offset. And I feel like that's a significant one, because if you start looking closer at this slope, it turns out it's just kind of arbitrary. It's apparently it's 20 degrees, and I'll tell you why I think it's 20 degrees in a minute. But really the closest thing we have to that in our slope family is this guy, 1x4. You start to see it's close, but it's not quite exact. So it's not really even on a grid, and it still doesn't match our control panel. So it's just kind of ridiculous. I mean, this piece has a really specific application as a mount for control objects, for levers, for maybe a handlebar set. It's got this weird 20-degree sloped top. This is actually not even 90 degrees when this kind of cuts back. Right there, that's like almost 100 degrees. The only thing that really lines up along the back here is when we had that this guy fitting in. That's really the only way that that kind of lines up. And then this thing doesn't, this side stud doesn't line back up into the system in any way, shape, or form that we were used to with standard plate building offsets. So maybe let's just look at the inner curvature here. Like, what is this doing? Well, does this fit? We start with our smaller one. We start with our 1x1 round. Does it fit that? Nope, it is too big for that. Doesn't quite fit. Alright, well, what's another circular element that's a little larger? We can look at our minifig head. So does that fit a minifig head? No, minifig head is too big. So in between 1x1 round and a minifig head, we have to start looking at wheel rims. And this is pretty much the closest thing I found was this small wheel rim. Even then, we don't even have a great semicircular structure here. It does kind of form a semicircle, and then it just flattens out. And so if we put two of these side by side and we try to figure out if we can get a cross section or a circle section, it's more of an oval shape. It's not even a circle here. And there's not even a way that you could really hold these two things together. If you want to try, go for it, but yeah, it's just such a weird piece in our system. And it has this really specific use that worked great in the 80s. They kept this thing in production until 2002, and then I think they just got tired of it, and they're like, yeah, this doesn't really fit with anything else in our system. You have to think back too, like into the 80s, how many of these other building pieces were available? How much of the system was it actually intended to fit with? So let's go ahead and look at some of the stuff I found online. Now this is just our Bricklink page, 2342 minifigure utensil control panel. It's just some of the information I was telling you earlier. Our mold year is 86 to 2002. 8 known colors, and I don't think these are fixed yet, but it's generally correct in terms of, you know, black being more common than blue. So quite a few in this black color. That was almost the entire production run from 86 to 2001. A dark turquoise here, not too common, only had a year or two of production. And then the yellow, no, the dark gray. So kind of, yeah, you look through the range of colors and it's really a mixed bag here with what we got in that regard. Don't pay attention to the new price in Germany. 7 cents for this guy. So it's not expensive, it's not rare per se. So I'll tell you where I got that 20 degrees. This is a website called Brick Camp. I think I am going to do a separate video on this website because it's pretty useful. But I just used the search feature and typed in the part number, and I found this contraption here. So this is basically looking at patterns that you can make with either single Lego pieces or a combination. Randomly related here are other ring structures, but let's just look at this one. It says it requires 18 of this element to form a ring. And so if we take the number of degrees in a circle, which is 360, divide that by 18 of these elements, and we get a 20-degree increment. And so that's telling me that if we set the bottom of the piece to 0, then this needs to be a 20-degree slope, so that by the time we get all the way back around with a stack of 18, we've completed 360 degrees of a circle. So that's where I'm getting that slope number. It seems reasonable. But when you actually do start stacking these things, it does look a little bit ridiculous because of this compound slope back here. So it kind of goes up, down, back up, back down. And I think eventually it does form this ring structure. I think these get verified by the author of the site, but again, we'll take a look at this website a little later. So back to our brick link, I did take a look at a couple of the sets that these show up in just to kind of see what the use was. There's this little classic space. You can see it barely right there. It's kind of a lower resolution image, but yeah, up for a control panel. What else do we have? Apparently it's in this set. I actually haven't looked really close to see where yet. Is it on the boat motor? Maybe it's in the house somewhere. On our police boat, it's up here in the prow as perhaps a place to wrap your anchor around. So it doesn't, it's not even really doing anything. It's just kind of there. Maybe at this point they were just using these things up. I don't even know. Here's an example of our robot. It just looks so sad, guys. Like, no wonder they discontinued this piece. It's really struggling to find a home in the system. They just slap it on top of this pivot, put some arms on, and then put on the head. Man, this thing just looks depressed. I don't even know why this was used. Here's an example of our handlebar usage, where we've got just kind of building up on the speeder build. And now if you look really close down here at the base, you can see it doesn't even look like his legs are fully attached, and this thing just looks a little bit high. So even when it's used in the application it was intended for, it's not even doing a great job at that. A brick set image to kind of round it off. We actually have 3 in this set. We've got a black one in the under the canopy with that lever configuration that I showed with Parker. We've got a white one on the front of this vehicle, just kind of standing there. Essentially, it is entirely in itself a control panel. And then there's a blue one here in our depressed robot from whatever wave this was. Somewhat cursed. So that's it for part 2342. I'm not going to spend any more time trying to figure out how this fits into our system. But yeah, I didn't even really talk about the 2 other little bumps on the front here. If you want to start putting plates onto this thing to make a slope, then you actually run into some trouble with that, because the only thing you can do is use a 2-wide plate, and it just barely fits in there, and so we can get those bumps up into the negative space underneath. If you start, putting on these wider pieces, then you start running into trouble where these bumps run into the underside of that circle. You can put on anything as long as you want until this side hits these 2 little bumps. I think there's supposed to be some kind of control dial or button, and maybe you can put a control console across like this way. Imagine this is printed with buttons and stuff. I can kind of see it, especially when it's just this single element on the front of a vehicle with maybe the levers on the side. That's really all I think it was supposed to be for the LEGO group. So there you have it, the utensil control panel, console, whatever you want to call it. It's a pretty lackluster piece in terms of being a great system developer. It just has these weird geometries. I was hoping it'd turn out to be a really cool piece for our HUWTAP feature, because I really like to investigate how those work into the rest of the system. And for the most part, LEGO elements do a really good job at being able to all work together. But this guy just doesn't. He has 5 potential connection points, and I found 3 somewhat usable system connections. And maybe you guys can find more. You know what? Take a look at this piece if you have it. I'd really encourage you to play around with this, because this is actually where you grow as a builder, and making your own MOC projects and stuff like that is when you take these difficult pieces and you just figure them out and figure out how to use them. This 20-degree slope, I mean, that's useful for something. You just have to figure out how to get around our button problem down here at the bottom. That's really restrictive. How are you going to get around this half stud offset that's just built into the whole thing? How are you going to get around the fact that this side stud doesn't line up with anything back on the base? It pretty much serves itself. Once you get a row of these things, that's all you can do with the side stud. So in terms of using this piece, I would encourage you guys to do it because it will help you grow as a builder when you work with these difficult elements. I'm just going to stack these up real quick to show you how ridiculous it looks, and then I'm going to end the suffering of this video. That poor depressed robot is going to be haunting my dreams. So you see what I'm saying with kind of the compound angle on here? How that just looks a little wacky. Yeah, I don't know. Apparently if you have 18 of these things you can make a ring, and that might be the most beautiful thing that you would ever build with this element. 2342 utensil control panel, perhaps the worst system element in the part family from the 80s. Alright, that's it guys. Brick System Brothers out.